You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Mathews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
It's 30 minutes away. I'll be there in 10.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
Frankie!
Ian, you two-timing son of a bitch.
Hey, your audio sounds fantastic.
All right, there we go.
Look at that. Look at old tech Frankie.
Nothing better than seeing two 50-year-old guys trying to use new technology.
Easy, 50-year-old. I am not 50. It's going to be a couple of years before we're having my party in Boston, having a great time down there. You take it easy.
Can we just do it in the winter?
February trip to Detroit. That's what we're doing. You know it.
Of course we are.
We're going to invite Nickel. It's going to be a good time.
We're going to drink water and coffee. All right,
Frankie,
let's get into this thing.
We're in the sweet spot right now, brother. We are both coaching youth sports at the same time. It's going to be a narrow slice. Frank's kids are 10 years younger than mine. I'm very close to retiring. I'm about a year or two left in this gig, and Frank has just begun with his T-ball practices.
That is correct. So for our loyal listening audience, you're not going to be able to see this, but for those of you tuning in to FS1, what you're going to see here is that I have my baseball roster. And what we're going to be talking about today is the human condition of doing the opposite of what you're told. We have a lot of fun examples of that. There is nothing better than trying to get a group of 3 to 6-year-old children who don't know a damn thing about sports to listen to you. The best one was this last night. There was a kid on our team. I don't know any of these kids' names. There's look at the size of these pictures of these kids' faces. I'm supposed to discern who's who from this. They all look identical. They look like little freaking teeny little kids' little faces.
You don't even know what your kid looks like. You're yelling at one of the kids. You think it's yours, and it's not even him.
Playing with his glove and playing with his penis all at the same time. And I thought it was my son. He was having same color cleats, same color pants, blonde hair, just bent over. And I'm screaming, Manny, my son, Manny, stand up. You're going to get a hit, Manny. Finally, I walk over. I'm like, oh, it's Dennis. Number one, people don't want to listen. Number two, they listen even less if you don't know their name.
How well did your practice plan go that you had meticulously plotted out by the minute?
Terrible.
Frank's asking me all these questions because I have years of experience on him now on coaching, and I'm like, oh, it's T-ball? Just play freeze tag for an hour. They'll have a great time. It'll be their favorite practice ever.
They don't know how to hold the bat. It's incredible.
So today we are talking about why people don't do what they're told, and why people rebel, why people push back, why people fight so hard for autonomy. And in the 80s, there's several movies to us Gen Xers that grew up in the 80s that are close to our hearts. One of them is Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which is a story about a kid rebelling against the school system at every chance he can. And another one is The Breakfast Club. And both of these movies, most people of our age can quote damn near the entire movie. But I find that's pretty consistent. Just about whatever your interests are, you loved both those movies if you grew up in the 80s. But Breakfast Club in particular, Frankie, why do you think Breakfast Club hit such a nerve with folks of our age?
So, in all honesty, I hadn't seen Breakfast Club until I got to college. And
oh my God, you've just ruined my whole. What is wrong with you? Did your parents not have cable?
Not until I was in high school. But
wait, no, I'm not letting this go. You didn't see Breakfast Club until college.
Correct.
So what spurred you to even see it in college if you hadn't watched it in the 80s?
Well, my incredible host, if Jason Calacanis was on this, he would have let me continue with the story because I was about to tell you. Here it is. So
I'm shocked and offended and frustrated by this whole situation.
It came out in 1985. 1985, I was 10. I probably wouldn't have connected to it as well anyways. I graduated high school, but 10, you don't get it as much. But by college, so at University of Florida, they had this thing. I'm sure it's all online now. But back when I was there, they had like a TV station that was just for the university. And they would show different movies throughout the course of like the month and the week. And the first movie that was on my first week in college was Breakfast Club. And I had never seen it. So it was like for me, it was absolutely perfect. I've seen it 100 times now. But it was like I was 18, I was on my own, and you're dealing with these kids that are seniors in high school who are all struggling with like who you are and that whole thing and kind of figuring that whole thing out. And it was perfect for me. Like literally I was at my parents' house, and a week later I was in college, and boom, this came on TV.
So Breakfast Club, if you're weird like Frank and you went long stretches in your life without having seen this movie, Breakfast Club is about a group of 5 kids who have to spend a Saturday in detention.
Yep.
So they had to spend 8 hours sitting in a library and serving out detention for various crimes they have committed as high school kids. I think I can speak to why it resonated with me, even though I was 8 when it came out. And so I was watching it when I was younger. I wasn't old enough to know what marijuana was or some of the reasons they were in trouble, but I was still a student. I was still a kid who was being told what to do, where to go, when to tie my shoes, what I had to go to school today, what sit and be quiet in each class, go from this to that. I think most of us as kids, we long for more freedom because a kid's life is pretty damn regimented. Less regimented, I guess, than an adult, but it's still pretty regimented. And we kind of fight for it, and in the movie, there's 5 of them. They're all 5 very different people. There's Bender's like the criminal who's always in detention. He's just a bad kid in general. And, you dig into a little more. He's got a real dick for a dad who's just brutal on him. So he's acting out because he doesn't feel like he's got autonomy. Claire's the princess.
Not like a porn star dick. He's like an asshole, right?
Just an asshole.
Sure.
Just an asshole. Thank you for clarifying that. I will make sure that that's in the show notes for anyone who was confused when I said the word dick. I wasn't speaking anatomically. I was actually speaking of, metaphorically.
As we covered 2 weeks ago, now you and my 2 people who are the barometers of woke, Ian Mathews and Bill Maher, have both told me woke is over. So we don't need he, him, they, this. We're just making sure. Keep going.
Our listeners tune in because we are the most unwoke management podcast you can find.
I interrupted you, Dick. Please.
Yes, thank you. I didn't mean to trigger you by talking about phallus. So there's the princess who she's rebelling because of the norms, the societal norms that are kind of put on her to always be perfect and to be beautiful and to have perfect grades. There's the brain, and the brain, he's rebelling because, he has such expectations on him that everything has to be an A and he always has to have the right answers. And, he kind of rebels by being a snarky little smartass all the time. There's the
played by the perfect person in that role. It's Anthony Michael Hall. And he was kind of at the end of his like golden, like that was one of the last movies with him being of the golden era. So it was like so perfect, like how that was cast and the timing.
For sure. And then there's Allie, who's the invisible girl. She's kind of the misfit that just wants to hide and doesn't want to feel the pressure of even being at school or being seen. And then there's the jock who feels pressure to win every, a lot of pressure from his dad. He's got to win every wrestling meet. So all of them have ended up there because they felt incredible pressure to do what other people were telling them to do. They were reacting against authority, I guess, right? And that's, I think, for me, all of them, there was a little bit of that. Like I resonated with all of them. Like, as a kid, it was like sometimes you feel like being a little bit of all of them, and you could kind of understand the reasons of why they were. And then there's the principal who plays throughout the movie, who is another authority figure. He's the heavy, and the detention is just sort of a little glimpse into their life of kind of an extreme version of being told what to do. You got to be quiet, stay in your seat, don't talk, right? It's like solitary confinement. And throughout the day, they get progressively more antsy and act out in more and more, but really that's just an example of what they're going through in their life and why they got there in the first place. So it's a phenomenal movie. If you're weird like Frank and you're waiting to see it, go see it right away.
Breaking news. Hopefully we're not giving any spoilers away for a movie that came out 42 years ago. So we need to put that in the show notes.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert on Breakfast Club on how this movie ends. Spoiler alert for those of you that have it on your watch list on Netflix.
All right, so a couple of things about Breakfast Club that I think are specific and think we should talk about, and it starts here, right? So you have two kind of mooring points, if you will. You have the principal, right, who's one side. You've got the kids in the middle, and they're the arc that Ian just defined. And then you have all the way on the left, or the opposite side of the principal, is Carl the janitor, who we all used to joke in middle school and high school about being someone who wanted to get into the janitorial arts. One of our loyal listeners will be a big fan of this because this was a subject we talked about a lot in middle school. And the kids were basically being an asshole to the janitor because they didn't respect them. They didn't respect the principal because he was in a position of power. So it kind of comes back to Bart Simpson. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. The kids don't like you no matter which side of the aisle that you're on. But what I will say about the characters in the movie is this. I didn't see it till I was 18. We've covered this. When I was 10, when it came out, I would have 100% resonated with the athlete. As this came out as an 18, when I saw it as an 18-year-old, I probably resonated with 2 or 3 of the people, right? I was not the brain at that point in my life ever. I wasn't really invisible, but I had been. We're all princesses in a little bit of a way, like our own cocoon. Our parents treat us a certain way.
I would have said princess for you, not athlete, not brain. Princess.
I have the dress in a couple of
sizes. You are a bit of a dandy.
From time to time, I gain a little bit of weight, so I like to have dresses in multiple sizes. You push against authority in some ways. So at 18,
Frank has a personal shopper who comes by, brings over clothes. What would you like to look at today, Mr.
Hey, Mr.
Cava?
Monologue, shut up. This is my time. So at certain points, I felt a little bit like the criminal because I was pushing back a little bit. So at 18, as Ian and I are now 50, we look at it from this perspective, and I can resonate with all 5. There's a little bit of all of those, including the brain. I've gotten really good at one particular thing, not necessarily podcasting, but I'm good at a lot of other stuff where I'm in a part of the world where I'm really good and looked at as someone who's smart. And I am married. I have 2 children, and I just talked about T-ball. I also feel invisible a lot, especially in my own house. So I think it's a really, really interesting story that shows kind of adults on both ends, kids in the middle, and things we're all dealing with no matter your age. And the fun thing about it is you go back and watch it and you'll relate to it differently because of the moment you're at.
I'm going to insert, Frank, a viewer poll into the show notes. Is Frank good at podcasting? I'd like to see what our viewers think, our loyal listeners. Do you think Frank is good at podcasting? It's a yes or no answer. We don't want you to elaborate. Just put your votes in, and we're going to share the results in our next episode. So it's interesting you bring up Carl the janitor, because this is also something interesting along the lines, psychologically speaking. They pick on Carl because all of these kids are being picked on in other ways. They're being picked on by their dad, right? A lot of times you see a kid who's a bully at school. He's probably getting bullied at home. And so he then goes and bullies someone less than him. You see this behavior in businesses. If the CEO is a bully, it kind of rolls downhill. His presidents become bullies, and they bully the VPs who then bully someone else. And that's all a little act of freedom and autonomy. I don't feel any autonomy up. I'm getting kind of pushed around, told what to do. So I don't get any say. So I'm going to go exercise my right with subordinates to go treat them the same way. So I feel some sense of control, some sense of freedom, some sense of power that I don't have above me. That's why a lot of times when I see an organization, Frank, with a lot of turnover or a morale issue or a retention issue, it starts at the top, right? They don't want to admit it, but their actions with maybe just a small group of people, maybe 5 or 6 people, can just disseminate down to thousands of people in a large organization.
100%. So
So there's a psychological term for all this. So the uh, when Frank's T-ballers or employees or students, children of parents, when they react out and do the opposite of what they're told, um, it's called reactance. In psychological parlance, it's called reactance. And reactance is just the motivational reaction to offers, people, rules, regulations that kind of threaten or eliminate specific freedoms, right? So, uh, it, in short, reactance is just don't tell me what to do. I'm going to do something different. It's a small act of defiance that gives me some sense of freedom that I have free will, right? So, this is when you tell a little kid, don't touch that stove. They touch it and they burn their hand and it sucks, but that's why they do it. This is what some of it's curiosity, but some of it is don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me what to do. We tend to do the opposite of what people say. And a big reason for it is we have a strong feeling within us to not be controlled, to not be manipulated, right? We're a stubborn people. Humans are a stubborn race. We and that's the thing about like every war that's ever been fought, it's always over freedom. It's always over one group of people not wanting to be told what to do, and so we're going to war. It's just our brain's response, reactance, when we feel like our sense of freedom is being threatened. And that's why we act out and do the exact opposite of what someone tells us.
So Ian went that way with it. I'm going to go a different direction, and it's this. What's known, Ian used reactance. I'm going to talk about the 6 human needs. There are 6. One of them is certainty. Certainty is I have a roof over my head. My parents love me. One of them is significance. I feel important. One of them is love or connection. You feel like you're part of a group or a community or a family. One of them is growth, right? So I'm progressing, I'm moving forward. Another one is contribution. And then the one that I use first is certainty. The second human need is uncertainty or variety. So what you start to work on is the pull and the push, right? Like everybody wants to know they're loved, but then they want to push the boundaries because I know I have certainty that they're going to still love me, even if I run across the street, even if I do what I'm not, because there's a sense inside all of us of a need to do something for that variety. And how much you actually have variety that pushes you forward kind of comes into your makeup. We all have it. It's just a matter of, is it a major driver for us or a minor driver? And those are the little things that get into the same type of psychology. And you can find it in all 5 of those main characters, and you can even find it in the principle and the gem.
I love it. So there's a couple of famous examples that you may or may not have heard of that are sort of business related. Procter and Gamble 6 or 7 years ago kind of inadvertently found itself in a really weird scandal. Kids on TikTok were eating those like Tide Pods, right? So these little detergent balls, and they would eat it, and then they would say, "I challenge Frank to eat a Tide Pod. You don't have the guts." Right. And it was similar to the cold water challenge that was going around, but kids were literally ingesting poison that could kill them. So this started happening. And at first they sort of ignored it. And then all these kids started getting really bad press because kids were turning up at poison control centers at alarming rates. And so their response to it, which was good intentioned, was to take their biggest, most popular spokesperson, which was Rob Gronkowski. At the time, he was a all-pro Super Bowl winning tight end that had a goofy, quirky personality that resonates with kids. And they had him do a series of commercials. I think one of them ran in the Super Bowl. And in this commercial, he just basically said, "What are we doing? Like, don't eat Tide Pods. They're really bad for you." Like, it was a very blunt, direct commercial. And I remember these series running because that's sort of how I found out about it. Like, kids are eating Tide Pods. What the hell's going on? And there was a weird set of commercials for me to watch. But what came out of this, Frank, was awful. In the ensuing months, the number of scenarios where kids showed up at poison control centers went up by a factor of 4. They had a 4x increase of kids eating Tide Pods as soon as Procter and Gamble said don't eat Tide Pods. That's reactance. That's don't tell me what to do. That you're just another authority that is getting in the way of my freedom. I'll do whatever the hell I want. It's TikTok, and I'm going to show you that I can do this. And so, that backfired in a big way using advertising. And the second very public example of this, but in a better way.
Let's lean into this one first, right? With the Tide Pods and why it didn't work. And why did it blow up? So my question for you is why do you think it blew up? I have a couple of thoughts, but what do you think?
Well, I just said it. It's reactance. It's kids being kids, and I'm told what to do all day. And this is one subtle act of rebellion that I can floss with my friends who are following me that see it, that I got guts. It's no different than when someone would, challenge me to jump off of something tall when I was a kid and say, you won't do it. And it's like, well, I will, don't tell me I won't do it, which by the way, still works now. Like we went to Boston with a bunch of Frank's friends and his brother, and I was joking with them because they were trying to trick me into chugging a drink. And I was like, you don't need to trick me. You just need to say I won't do it. That still works. Like 30 years later, that worked when I was 18. That works now. Just say you won't chug that drink. So reactance is my answer, Frank.
That go into play, and they go into play this way. I think it's who they used. Gronkowski kind of also is someone who you don't really take seriously. He's somebody who you kind of resist against because of his nature. He's not somebody who I look at and say, yeah, I want to follow what that guy does. It kind of feels as if there's a little bit of a pushback on the other side because of he is such a goofball. The other side of it is this. We use this thing inside of our work. It's called the predictive index. And there are 17 reference profiles inside the predictive index. It's a longer conversation. But if you're a salesperson versus an admin person versus a construction person, you have different makeups. And everybody is a complex being, just like everybody is one of the 5 kids from Breakfast Club. Inside of your makeup, there is one of them that's called a maverick. Do you know, what would you think a maverick is, Ian, based on just what you're hearing?
When I think of Maverick, I immediately go to Top Gun.
100%.
Someone who plays by a different set of rules. And
100%. All of us have a little bit of Maverick in us, which you're calling here reactance, right? It's the same exact thing. So I have to tell you this story. We have somebody who works for us. Well, she worked for us as of Monday. She's a Maverick. And not only does she not want to be told what to do, she was literally, and she was putting down time frames, dates, and things on work that hadn't been touched. It was like lying. It wasn't like lying. It was lying, 100% lying. So what it is you have this, and there's a healthy amount, and then there's the daredevil side, which happens when you're a kid, and then there's the side where it can fester and kind of manifest in a way that can be very, very, very bad for you if you don't get it under control. I would think, from my perspective, I had Maverick or reactance in me more when I was a teenager than I do now, because I was trying to prove myself and figure it out. And that's why I think Breakfast Club is an awesome thing to talk about with teenage kids. But you learn how to control that. And if you notice, the people doing Tide Pods and weren't listening to Gronkowski were kids. But as we get into the smoking example, it's a different psychological trigger.
I'm curious, because you have more experience. I haven't used a lot of your predictive index. Is it possible to be a rule follower and a Maverick?
No, not. You would be somebody else if you were. You wouldn't be a Maverick. If you look at a Mavericks, the way it breaks out, I have a lot of Maverick tendency, but I have enough I pull back to the middle with my organizational skills and my desire to be part of a community a little bit more than an independent. And I'm a straight driver. So I have some of these capabilities in me, but I know how to, if you know me and you know me well, I break a lot. I don't break laws, but I break soft rules. Lines don't apply to me so much. Speed limits, time frames. That's a lot of Maverick. But also there's the part of my mom who was a school teacher who kind of taught me, no, you do this or you're kind. So it kind of pulls you back to center a little bit. It, like, the best example I can think of with this, Ian, is a Navy SEAL. A Navy SEAL, when I was a kid, I used to think, wow, they must be the best behaved. Navy SEALs have a wild streak. They have maverick, or they have this reactance in them, and they know when to call it and when not to. Kids doing Tide Pods don't know when to call. That's stupid and dangerous. But as you get to be older, it's something like, oh, this is a tool in my tool belt, and now I need to utilize it. And if you do it correctly through management, through execution, through being a very highly trained Navy SEAL, you know when you need to not use your training and you need to believe in your gut. And that's where you become really good.
I asked that question because as you were explaining the two, I would struggle to, I need to take the test, I guess. I would struggle to tell you whether I was rule bound or a maverick. In some ways, I feel like I'm a maverick. In a lot of ways, I am really rule bound. And like societal norms, like little things like Frank will cut a line in a second. I won't. I'll sit in the back and I'll get mad at him. Don't do that. There's other people.
But there's
like
things
Frank
that
will just do things that make me uncomfortable all the time.
But there's things that you do that make me uncomfortable because we all control it in our own way. You're not a maverick. You're a captain, or I am what's called a strategist. I would imagine you're probably there, but we all have these tendencies, just like we all have these tendencies towards reactance. Like, we have them, but is it your driving tendency?
Can you control it?
Or
Can you control it? If there's a set of norms, will you follow them and not be too outside of the box? Like, is that kind of it? Like, you have the maverick tendencies, but you can control yourself.
We did.
Do you find that you want a little more maverick in your salespeople?
It depends. It depends on who I have managing them. As the person who now manages them, I don't have time for that shit. I need people who are kind of take what we say and go do it. We had a lot of mavericks. I have someone who was a maverick, but he's been with us for like 10 years. He's no longer a maverick. He's gotten a little bit older. He's now a controller. So he's a little bit, he's softened a little bit. What this makes me think of immediately, Ian, is the book that we did. It's the yellow book. I think it was called Multipliers, right? Wasn't that the book?
Yeah.
So there's multipliers and there's magnifiers and diminishers. So what it is it doesn't mean you're a bad person if you do one versus the other. It just means situationally you need to do that. Sometimes you need to help people multiply. And then some people, it's like you need to get your kid and grab him by the back of the shirt and drag him off the street. So there's moments for both. Same thing with this. There are moments where you need to utilize this skill and strength and lean into it to become a fully functioning employee, spouse, member of society. But other times you need to kind of listen to it and say, nope, I have to follow.
So what are some approaches that managers can take, knowing that there's a little bit of maverick in all of us and that that reactance is very real and it's within every human being? I was starting to get into an example, and it's always wild that the state of Florida can be cutting edge and ahead of the curve on something. But in this case,
easy.
I have a story about the state of Florida not being an embarrassment.
For those of you that are curious, I am a product of the Florida public schools. I know you have been wowed with my intellect, vocabulary, humility.
Frank is that Florida man you always see every headline starting with. Every anti-smoking campaign for decades failed. All of them, right? And if you look at all of the ads that would run, right, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, all of them, it was just very, don't smoke. It's bad for you. Look, here's what a lung looks like on cigarettes. Here's someone who can't talk anymore because of cigarettes. Here's someone with cancer who died too young. It was always just don't smoke, don't smoke, don't smoke.
Scare the crap out of them.
It was very authoritative. It was very heavy-handed. It was always some 50-year-old man's voice telling you what to do. It was just more authority. And all it ever did is serve to make more kids want to smoke. And they would go and they would, try to run studies on this and interview these kids and say, why do you smoke? And what they would find is that little smoke break they would take behind school was their one little act of rebellion of the day. right? They got home and their parents were overly controlling. They were told when they could watch TV, when they couldn't, when to eat dinner, what to eat at dinner, eat all of the food on your plate, get your homework done. And these kids saw smoking as this small little act of rebellion against adults. And so when you ran ads with more adults telling you what not to do, it made them think in the back of their head, and unconsciously, they weren't thinking about this, screw you. This is my chance to kind of show back. And so Florida, they hired someone within the government. They made a good hire, and they hired someone who had done the homework on psychological bias. And he really knew what he was up against with reactance. And so instead of running ads that told you how bad smoking was, they ran a series of ads. And then they also conducted a whole bunch of focus groups of kids. But the ads showed the inside baseball on marketing for big tobacco. And they would show them, like, by the way, they think you're fools. Let me show you what they're doing. Ever noticed why there's a cartoon camel for Joe Camel for camel smoking? You think that's for adults? You think adults think camels are cool? You ever wonder why? And they went into the detail of how much money Marlboro was spending, Philip Morris was spending to trick you. And they went into the concepts that they used in advertising, and their ads showed how big tobacco was manipulating children, right? That you didn't even know about. And what happened was, within a year of this, they saw their first drop in teenage smoking. It was like the first campaign that ever actually worked. And by the way, it kept dropping every year. Florida did an amazing job with all of these series of productions. And what they did was they used reactance against big tobacco. They said, hey, look, big tobacco's telling you what to do and you're too stupid to figure it out. You're getting tricked and manipulated with marketing and advertising, and you don't have and so kids would stop smoking because they were like, well, screw that. I'm not going to get tricked anymore. So they flipped reactance, right? Whereas in forever, big tobacco relied on reactance. Authorities telling them not to smoke made them cool. They flipped it to where they showed the other side, and some kids started stopping smoking because they didn't want to be told what to do by big companies.
As you get a little older, experience, those type of things, what I talk to my staff about all the time is if you pick up the Wall Street Journal, you don't immediately go towards the one guy who writes about sports and read about business. It starts to leave clues over time. And what's really interesting to me are the kind of clues that kind of come out as time goes on. Like if you notice this year, there was a major thing with whatever he calls himself now, Kanye, whatever. There's been a lot of uprising around towards Jews. And if you look at it from that perspective, there was two movies this year that were both focused around the Holocaust. Because if you look at the broader context of what's happening in the world, Hollywood hears this and they're actually leaning into it and going kind of saying, no, this is bad and this is why it's bad. Let's get back into that. And those were two movies. One of them was for Best Supporting Actor, which was awesome, called The Real Pain. And the other one was The Brutalist. Those are both things that you can kind of see the big picture being steered. The ad campaign that Ian talked about ran from 1998 to 2003, and it was called the Florida Truth Campaign. The cool thing about this is it was actually funded from a massive settlement the year before, 1997, that was billions of dollars. So Florida spun into this. So what Ian talked about was really, really good kind of overview of the Truth Campaign and how they did it. Talking about the cigarettes, talking about they're going to your child brain and they're treating you as such, and this is why. But then the bigger context, like I just talked about with Hollywood, is now it was bad. And everybody knew it was bad. And you know how you know it's actually reached the next level? One of the coolest movies that ever came out about smoking was called Thank You for Smoking. And it was completely and totally about all the bad things that go into cigarettes. 100%, right? And it just takes that entire kind of momentum. And they knew they had something. What Hollywood wants to do is they want to make something that's relevant and makes money. So what they did is they looked at this stuff and they said, oh, the shifting is happening. So instead of leaning into and turning cool people into smoking, we're going to do the opposite. And if you watch the movie, it actually jokes about exactly that. But that's how you can kind of tell and see from different perspectives of what's happening from the pull and the push and the back and the forth over time of how something kind of goes. And I thought that was really, when you brought this up, was the first thing I thought about was that.
So using reactance, both of those movies, that movie does the exact same thing that the Florida campaign
100%.
did.
It personifies it.
You use reactance for your own good, right? So you know that people are going to rebel against, so give them something to rebel against that you want them to rebel against.
Heart-clogging cheese from the state of Vermont.
Another fantastic approach that I sort of used to do inadvertently, and I got it from sales, just because in sales it's pounded into you to ask more questions. But I'm gonna just, before I get into this technique, I've got a little clip from Mad Men that I want to share, Frankie. And whenever we share our screen on Let Me Speak to a Manager podcast, it's always an adventure. So we're going to see exactly how I can make this happen. So here we go. You see that, Frankie?
Yes, I do.
Here we go. So in that clip, Frankie, as you watch Don Draper do his thing, who, for just kind of watching, who does it feel like is in control in that conversation?
Oh, it certainly feels like Don. And if you know that show, you know he's pooping all over, which is kind of a shame. Watching that out of context without watching that whole entire episode, you're like,
yeah, and it's out of context a little bit, but the context of that, she was all hyped up to go get a pay raise and a new title, and she kind of comes in puffed up a little bit. I'd like to have my performance review. I've had quite a year.
Yep.
And she's in control. And damn it, I'm in here to get this done.
Yep.
And he quickly takes control by just asking an open-ended question, right? What do you see for the future? And she gets frustrated. Is that on there? Right? She's got her performance review, and he's like, no, just curious. And he just keeps probing and asking questions. It's all he's doing. But I think there's a cool breakout moment in there that leads to a nice little, at least later in the TV series, it leads to something else. But she says 2 or 3 things that are sort of parallel. And he just listens and he goes, so you want fame? And her, like, at first she kind of makes a face like, that's not what I said. But then she thinks and she smiles and says, yes. And to me, like, as a manager, right, Don Draper's got his issues, but as a manager, that's really what you're trying to do, is get to really what's your motivation for somebody. Now I can help you. You're being honest. Now you're being honest with what you want. You want fame. Okay. Let's talk about how to get that. Let's talk about what you need to do to get there. And what he's doing, Frankie, his approach of asking questions, it's called the Socratic method, right? So I'll share this again. So the Socratic method, well, I thought I was going to share it, and of course I'm not. The Socratic method comes from Socrates. And if you think about Socrates at the peak of his power, Frankie, he's one of the most well-read people on the planet. He's published more on philosophy than just about any philosopher ever. He's the head of philosophy department at the most prestigious university in the world. He's an advisor to emperors. People come to him all day and they give him thin slices, 1 minute, right? They come to him and they say, Socrates, I have a problem. And he listens and he gives advice, right? Based on what you said, I think you should do this. But what Socrates found, Frankie, was normally the advice he gave wouldn't match exactly what they were hoping he would say. And the reason is, you got a minute slice of a problem they've been living with all day, every day, for weeks, months, years sometimes. They wake up with this problem, they go to bed with this problem. They have so much context that they haven't shared with him. How could he possibly give them a great solution? So they would hear it and they'd maybe be a little disappointed, but they would try it because it's Socrates. And what he found was they'd give a little half-ass effort. They'd give a half-ass effort to it, and it wouldn't work. And then who would they blame? Themselves or Socrates?
They would blame themselves.
Nope, they'd blame Socrates. They'd say, Socrates gave me this idea and it didn't work. and it was a dumb idea. Now my problem is worse. And so Socrates was like, screw you. I'm not going to give people advice anymore because you're just going to blame me. And what he found was most people knew the solution when they came. The whole basis of the Socratic method, Frankie, is people have within them the knowledge to go fix their problem. You just have to pull it out with open-ended questions, because in his view, even if he gave them an A+ solution, if they gave a D effort, on an A+ idea, it would fail. But even if they came up with their own solution, which felt like a B- solution, but they gave it an A+ effort, they'd be way better off than the other way around, a half-ass effort on a great solution. And so the Socratic method, there's 5 quick steps. You ask a question, you receive what they have to say. 2, you reflect on it, you think about it a little bit. You ask for some evidence, so you probe, you ask another question. Then you restate what you thought you heard. So in the video, that's what Don does when Don says, so you want fame. She didn't say that. She said, nail a big idea, land a huge account, be the first woman, right? First woman vice president, blah, 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 blah. Everything she said was centered around fame, and she didn't know she was saying that. But as Don's listening, he says, I'm going to restate this. So you want fame. Then you restart with another question. And the way Don does it is, what else? What else? That's what I'm asking you. Then what? Then what? Right? And he's trying to pull things up on the iceberg that you can't see because she's just showing the top of it. He's trying to pull that out of her so that she can start to be honest with herself about what she needs to do.
So what I think is interesting about this is the first time I ever heard about a Socratic method was by a guy by the name of J. Abraham. Do you know him? Wrote a book. He's really popular in the Tony Robbins circles. And by the time we saw him, he was way past his prime and just like a windbag. And we're like, what a ridiculous story this was. But he was trying to get at exactly what you're talking about. And what I find is this. So the trick you use in here, the situational leadership. So I think it depends on what you're trying to achieve and who it is that you hire. And what I'll tell you is most of you are listening to this, either you're managing people or you're dealing with a spouse or like something, right? Kids. So it very much depends on who your audience is and how you can use these skills. If I remember that scene right from Mad Men, Peggy cries and like storms out. Later in the story, it comes back around, but Don kind of like diminishes her in a major way that we don't do anymore in the public setting or in the professional setting because it's a story from the 60s got better. But the reason I want to drive into this is this. Whenever I hire somebody new and they see our sales department, they're like, basically what they say without knowing the verbs or the words is use the Socratic method. Lead, ask questions, these kind of things. When I try that in sales, it flops. What I have to manage in sales is something completely different. I have to manage the person, the process of what we're dealing with. And I don't ask you for a lot of questions. I ask you for a little bit more about the guidelines, and we manage to that. And because of that, we are literally going to have 157% growth year over year, Q1 to Q1, because we dig in and we dial into it. But that's not how you create managers. It isn't. There's a couple of people in that side of the business who could rise up to that, but day to day, that's how you have to manage sales. However, if you manage something else, I run like a Finlandic country. Women run every department around here, and we're better for it. But what I do with them, people who deserve it and who have shown an ability to learn and to grow, it's a lot more through questions. And it's a lot more through asking those specific things about, well, what do you think? What are your thoughts? What's leading you to believe this? It's the same exact process of receive, reflect, ask, restate, and then restart the whole process again and almost make it their own. Now, that is something that I find in a small business that becomes earned. And if you've earned that right, you become someone who's like an untouchable around here because you synthesize and do and have earned the right to go and do. We had a conversation with somebody a couple of days ago. She came to her manager and had a really, really, really kind of hard conversation. And there was feedback to me that I didn't go directly to the employee. And the manager came to that employee and said, Yeah, you're not going to get that from him. He's not going to go around me. He's going to come through me and have me deal with you first. And that's because of exactly what we talked about. Don does it in a disempowering way in that episode, but if you do it in the proper way, you can completely and totally.
I would argue, though, that that little minute slice of the Socratic method was better for Peggy than anything, because ultimately she decides to go to another place. She decides to go kick their ass. She learned a lot about herself. She was pissed because she wanted him to just agree with her and give her a raise, but it sort of brought some stuff out of her that she became much better from that coaching, that like difference. Now, again, it's TV, so all the personalities are obnoxious and you couldn't get away with anything in Mad Men.
No.
But that's an actual interesting slice where a process is used that I find really effective in management.
Is it relevant? Hell yeah. Can you get some good lessons from it? Yes. Should you emulate that in the business setting? 100% no. But if you use that process without malice and you instead use it with good intentions, which as managers and owners of companies you should have because you want these people to succeed, I would say you can have that same success with Peggy and keep her helping your team, not somebody else's, and working against you. But overall, yeah, it's wonderful.
So let me give you an example on this. It's beginning of the year. This is the time where everyone does their employee appraisals, right? End of year appraisals. You might do mid years, but just about everyone's doing appraisals January, February, March, right? I always hated this exercise, Frankie. I hated it. My first job, I had like 18 sales reps that reported to me, and I traveled a lot. So I'd be getting these emails from HR. Hey, we see you've done O of 18. You have done none of your appraisals. When are you going to do them? And I would just get all these updates. And I was like, this sucks. And I would always do all of them like the weekend before they were due. So I would come in on a weekend and type up 18 Word docs of performance appraisals and schedule them all for people. And I would print it and I would read to them what I had written. On time management, I gave you a 4 out of 5. I think you're pretty good at balancing your time. You handle volume. And I would just talk at them. And I did that for 3 years at GE. I left, I went to NVR, and I still hated performance appraisals because guess what? On January 15th, I was getting emails from HR. Don't forget, you got to do your appraisals. And I would have all these to do. So about 3 or 4 years into NVR, I just hate them so much. I came in over the weekend. I did my normal, knock out all my appraisals, right? And they all start to sound the same. But I just was so bored with it that I wanted to try something different. So my best manager came in and she was number one in the rankings, killed it. 2 years running, really competitive, young, aggressive. And I'm like, screw it. I'm not going to have the same.
She was so good you hired 3 people with the same name.
Exactly. So she comes in, I flipped the review over and I said, tell me what I wrote. Tell me what I wrote. And she was like, what do you mean? I'm like, I bet you could write this review yourself. Let's start with your strengths. What are your strengths? She was like, you probably put something in there that about my competitiveness. You're really competitive. I'm really competitive. I finished number 1 in the rankings and that wasn't assured a few months ago. I like to win. I'm like, yeah, I wrote that in there. What else? What else do you think I wrote? Well, you're organized and I think you like that I don't miss deadlines. I'm very organized, blah, blah, blah. We go through all this. And at the end, she's like, that's all I got. And I was like, I'll add one more. You tell me the truth. I'm surrounded by about a bunch of yes men and women. When I have a dumb idea, you tell me that's a dumb idea and this is why, and you have courage. And that keeps me from doing dumb shit. And I need that. And please keep speaking to me in a way that that I will listen. And so then I went to the next one. I said, okay, what did I write for your development needs? This is like 10 years ago, Frankie. I remember this conversation like it was yesterday. And she said, you wrote, I need to be more diplomatic. Like she didn't even pause. Why would I write that? She's like, well, I got into it a couple more times with Scott this year. And I was like, Scott was our underwriting manager, right? He's the top underwriting decision maker in the company, in a mortgage company, pretty important executive, right? And I said, what does got into it mean? She's like, well, got into pretty loud arguments and said some things I regretted. How'd you know that you said some things you shouldn't have said? Well, you called and chewed my ass. I'm like, okay, but how did you know more? She goes, well, I feel like I paid for it both times. How? well, I just feel like he didn't pick the phone up as quick when I called. I didn't get the same amount of effort. He wasn't like denying my loans, but I feel like I got no help for a while. I paid for it. I said, okay. So I remember this, Frank. I said, has this been in your review before? She said, every year. I'm like, every year? So I said, one of two things is true here. You are incapable of being diplomatic, or you think I'm full of shit and that this isn't actually important. You can just bowl your way through and that's all fine. And she said, neither of those are true. And I said, well, it's in there every year and you're not getting better at it. Tell me, which one's it closer to? She said, I guess probably the latter, because I am capable of it. I said, okay. At the end of this review, I'm going to ask you what you want to do next in your career. What are you going to say to me again? That I want your job? Yep, you want to be a vice president. Now, let me ask. I interact with the CEO on a regular basis, with presidents. Am I allowed to not have any diplomacy? Am I allowed to act like a bull in a china shop whenever I want? No. So is diplomacy important in my job? Yes. Okay, so we've agreed a non-negotiable to be a vice president is to have diplomacy. We've also agreed that you're not interested in being diplomatic. So quit telling me you want my job. You don't deserve it. You'll never get it. And she's like, well, that's not fair. And I said, okay, well, tell me what part of it is not fair. And she's like, and she just paused and she was like, all right, I get it. So I did this a little more. And then at the end, I said, if you could go back on your year and underwrite it all over again and go give yourself some advice to, yourself 12 months ago, what would you tell yourself? And she would say, I would say that I need to fire, I'm going to say Bill. I don't want to say the name. I would fire Bill. And I said, but you did fire Bill. She said, yeah, in October. I should have fired him in February. I knew he needed to go, but he's got a family and I got caught up in sentiment. And by the time I fired him, he left such a mess that it took us 3 months to clean it up. I said, okay, what's your bill right now? What's something you're procrastinating? And she said, well, I need to tell Paul that people don't want to be loan officers in his division. They all want to go to other divisions because he's so rough on them. And he's always pissed at me that he has too much turnover, but it's kind of his fault. And I need to tell him that. And I was like, is that going to be easier to tell him in 6 months or tomorrow? She's like, well, tomorrow. I'm like, okay. And so we get done with this, Frankie, and it took like 2 hours. They used to take like 30 minutes. This one took forever. And she was doing almost all the talking. All I did was ask questions. I didn't even know what Socratic method meant. I was just changing it up.
A good interview.
And the next day she comes in the afternoon. She said, I want to show you something. Brings me to her office. She had cleared out her whole whiteboard. It used to have the settlement schedule on it. And this time it had a whole bunch of reminders. It had goals. It had scheduled time with Paul to talk to him. It had take Scott out to lunch. It had like a bunch of stuff. And, if that would have happened, I would have thought, okay, that was a fun conversation. But the next year, I did not write be more diplomatic on her review. Did not have one outburst. She changed. I didn't tell her you need to change. It all came out of her by asking a lot of questions. And so I have never done a performance appraisal different than that since. That's the only way I do them. I just ask you questions. And the other benefit of it is, as a manager, if you can't write it as I wrote it, I'm doing a lousy job throughout the year of giving you feedback and coaching you. I'm being passive or passive aggressive. I'm not being assertive. You should know everything that's coming out of my mouth and how I feel about your performance and you and your future, because we don't just talk about it once a year. I talk to you about it all the time, and you know exactly what you need to work on. So I've always used the Socratic method instead of at the end of the year just telling you, you need to do this more, you need to do this more, you need to do this more. Means that they'll probably do the opposite in a lot of those areas.
I come back to situational awareness and understanding who it is you're talking to and in what role these people are. A lot of this works, but a lot of it doesn't if you have the wrong people. I have a maintenance department. It doesn't work that way. But I know who you're talking about. I won't say her name. Super, super smart person, really, really bright, already a manager. 100%. So I think if you do it the right way, you have to know, like, when do you give your kids long-term advice, when do you ask them questions, and when you grab by the back of the shirt and say, don't jump in, you can't swim. So there is a combination of these skills, but it's very similar to how this whole thing started. There is 5 kids in a cafeteria in the Chicago suburbs in the 80s, and collectively they represent the psyche of all of us. They are individuals who have kind of manifestations, if you will, of a dominant characteristic. That's not how life really works. You need to understand when to utilize these strengths. You need to understand sometimes you're better suited, especially with the smart ones or with little kids. Sometimes you say, don't do that because you want them to do it. Don't eat your beans because you need them to. Psychologically, you have to know when you need to throw which pitch. You can't always throw fastballs. So now if you throw a changeup, it can be used as a skill and a tool. It can be used in parenting, it can be used in relationships, and it can 100% be used.
I love that. You have to know your team. You have to know who the people are. And, situational leadership, it's kind of mean-spirited to do the Socratic method with someone who doesn't know anything. So like, if you got a kid who's never rode a bike before and he keeps falling off and you keep saying, why did you fall off? How come you can't turn without falling over? What do you think you should do different? They'll just start crying and say, I don't know. I keep falling. You'd be like, you have to keep pedaling when you go. You have to, with someone who doesn't have it's a skill or a will issue. And I think on Socratic method, it's very much will. Like when they don't have the motivation or the enthusiasm. If they don't have the skill, you need to kind of show them specifically. Frank right now is in T-ball. He has to show them how to hold a baseball bat, which hand goes over top of the other, how to swing it. He can't just ask them questions and they figure it out on their own. There's more instruction that's required, and you have to know your team. So Peyton Manning is one of the only quarterbacks that could call his own plays. He earned it. He earned the right to have freedom and autonomy because he studied more than the frickin' coordinator, and so they let him call his own plays.
If you're being true to this and you're doing a good job as a manager and a leader, what you'll do is you'll find little trial areas where you can try this. And a great example is this. With my sales team, sometimes I'll ask, what do you want to do next? That's part of the Socratic method. And if they don't have the right answer, you either try and guide them there. You say, can you just do this for the sake of time? Yesterday, teaching 3 to 6-year-olds how to hit. The first person I was working with versus the last, I started a slightly different process. You ever swung a bat before? What side of the plate you stand on? You can still do that even at the most fundamental level.
Yeah.
Right?
Teach me back. What did I just say? Teach me back.
That's exactly right. So
what did we talk about last week? Show me the important things.
But with 3 to 6-year-olds, they don't remember a damn thing. So
show me the alligator. Show me the alligator, right? How do you catch with 2 hands? Alligator, right? You're going to get into all of that. Show me the pizza. What's your backhand do? Right here, right? I'm a waiter. You kind of come up with some things where instead of just telling them all the time, someone show me. Someone tell me which base we run to. So that's awesome. That's Socratic method too, right? That's teach me back what I've already taught you at the most basic level.
100%.
So, Frankie, how do you think this podcast went?
I think it went as long as we anticipated.
It's fantastic. So we appreciate you viewers. We appreciate you sitting through and listening to us. I am going to grow more of a gray beard so I look more like Socrates in the next situation. So when I use this method, it's more obvious.
Mine's coming in.
It is coming in. You got a few gray hairs looking like Socrates a bit. Don't forget to give us 5 stars and tell all your friends about how amazing our show is. Frankie, damn, it's been good seeing you, homeboy.
Ian, anything you'd like me to do better? Well, I'm going to log on.
You're doing great. You're not the best color man in the business for nothing, folks.
See you guys.
See you, Frankie. If you like what you just heard, and judging by the viewership numbers, you did, hit that follow button and leave us a 5-star review. It helps other people find the show. And it lets Frankie and I know that, a few people are listening to this.